As we were aware that we have been in an expedition in finding and exploring what a lump sum contract is and how we are going to tackle this situation in the FIDIC context, right? So we were going through certain amendments to the standard form of contract, the newest one which is being issued by the FIDIC Red Book 2017 version. And we realized that some of the clauses pertaining to the FIDIC 2017 version has been deleted and some of the clauses have been amended, right? Now, the question which comes into your mind and we are going to answer is, we have already laid the foundation related to that. Here are the questions that will come into a common person's mind, right? Which I have extracted from one of our delegates who have raised this question in a very nice way. Because you remember during the last week, I asked some of you to give your insights about this situation, right? Because FIDIC Red Book was not meant to be used for a lump sum contract as a original version, right? And then it needed to be guided, it needed to be corrected as well. Unlike the new engineering contract approach, wherein they have got different approaches, such as approach A and approach C. Approach A, actually we call it the option one, which has got this lump sum provision as opposed to the remeasurement provision. So it has been exclusively drafted in order to accommodate the request, in order to accommodate the requirements of a lump sum contract. However, FIDIC's approach was a little bit different. What they wanted is they wanted to amend certain clauses and delete certain clauses so that you are converting that particular contract into a lump sum contract. Now, let us go through this particular sheet, which I found quite interesting, which was sent by one of our delegates. It says the FIDIC Red Book is originally created for remeasurement contract. Yes, it is a true fact. Because if you talk about the FIDIC Red Book, the origin of the Red Book, it was supposed to be a remeasurement contract. FIDIC Yellow Book, which was supposed to be a design and build type of a contract, was the one which we considered as a lump sum type of a contract, right? So why do we need to have a separate contract in order to have a lump sum type of a contract? Because in the market, certain employers, they seek for price certainty. Okay, we call it the cost certainty because if you are comparing a lump sum contract with a remeasurement contract, the major driver in giving the comfort to the employer is the price. Okay, so and the major driver of risk related to the contractor is that they have to bear the risk of the quantities, right? And when I come into that model, how the FIDIC has drafted this particular model, when we go to the subclause 14.4, right, there is a schedule of payments are introduced, which is basically used for lump sum contracts, even though it is not specifically mentioned, but I will give you some insight about that, how it is going to be very useful for a drafters of the lump sum type of contract, right? So the first sentence itself is correct. It was meant to be a remeasurement contract. We did not think about that sort of a drastic changes to already drafted type of a contract. However, the drafters of different lump sum contracts may delete, amend general conditions in different way under contract data. Now, the word that the delegate has used is the contract data as far as FIDIC 2017 version is concerned. The FIDIC 1999 version and the earlier versions were related to the appendix to tender. The users of standard bidding document 2, SBD2. are also familiar with the word, the contract data. However, if a lump sum contract drafted with essential deletions amendments, then those contracts can be subjected to price changes under following circumstances. And some insight has been given under the variations and claims. Now, as you are aware, right? As you are aware, now there is a slight change in the layout of FIDIC and NEC, which is a very major change, which is called the compensation events. The compensation events in NEC perspective takes care of the time and cost as one thing. But in FIDIC, variations and claims have been separately identified and separately defined. There are definitions for claims and variations as well. That is why the delegate has separately mentioned about these two. And the first one, it says, due to design changes by the engineer employer. The first thing which came into my mind is, yes, the design changes can be introduced under FIDIC contract, but there are three golden rules, right? The three golden rules which comes into your mind is the contractor can object to a variation if there are three things which will happen. Okay, the number one is, right, the nature and the specific purpose of a specification if it is drastically changing, right? So the typical example which I was taking in one of my previous lectures is that if you change a reinforced concrete structure into a structural steel structure, that is not an ideal situation to enforce a variation. Now, the FIDIC new terminology, the FIDIC new version introduces variations in two phases. The phases in the sense FACES, not PHASES. Okay, not phases, it is phases. Number one, variation by instruction. Okay. Number two, variation by request for proposal. As you are aware, the likes of variations by instructions are triggered by two different requirements. Number one, it is necessary for the completion of the contract. Number two, it is legally required. Okay, it is imposed by the law that you have to do. The FIDIC earlier versions introduced an inappropriate word called appropriateness. Okay, because appropriateness is a subjective term. Therefore, when we are talking about a subjective term, it is very difficult to judge whether something is appropriate or inappropriate. Therefore, due to the design changes by the engineer slash employer, raises a question to you, right? Whether it is a lump sum contract or a remeasurement contract, whether a variation can be triggered. So that is number one that you need to understand. And that is the first hindrance the employer or the engineer will face when you are drastically changing the specification. When you are introducing the specification changes in such a way that the contractor could not be foreseen the future changes, right? So that is what you need to keep in mind. Number two is there is no available materials. There are no available materials at this juncture of the contract. The contractor, if he is able to sufficiently prove the fact that these materials could not be procured in order to complete the works at that particular stage, that will trigger a full stop. Number three is about the safety, right? Safety and environmental concerns that is pertaining to the law which has been imposed by the country, right? So those are the three things that you need to keep in mind. Therefore, the variations in a lump sum contract is possible. Yes, it is possible because the contractor is pricing the lump sum contract based on two different things. Number one is the drawings, which says how to build the building, the bridge, or the road, or the structure, right? Sorry, what to build, right? The drawing says what to build, and the specification which says how to build that. That is why the specification becomes a more prioritized document than the drawings, because specification is more detailed. If you see the priority of the documents, subclause 1.5, the specification is above the drawings. Therefore, yes, the first item is correct. Number two, under value engineering. As you have seen, none of the value engineering clauses have been touched by the difference between the remeasurement contract and the lump sum contract. Therefore, clause 13.2 is applicable either to the remeasurement or to the lump sum contract. You might remember when I told you that there are two ways and variation can be triggered. Number one, variation by instruction. Number two, variation by request for proposal. Okay. So the request for proposal and instruction can come in different ways, different modes, in order for the contractor to initiate a variation. That is why under value engineering also, lump sum contract can be subjected to a change, but there is no difference between the remeasurement contract and a lump sum. So the first two things which we were discussing, right, are inherent to a lump sum contract as well as a remeasurement contract. And the adjustments of changes in legislation. Yes, of course, there is a clause for that one. If there is a legislative change, you might have gone through that there is a document which has been issued by FIDIC, how to address the COVID-19 situation. That particular COVID-19 situation document addresses case studies, 6 to 7 case studies, wherein all the case studies impose an imposition of a variation whenever there is legislation change. Because legislation change is not because of a change triggered by a party to the contract. Okay? Then, under adjustments of cost price fluctuations, this is where the lump sum fixed price comes into play. Okay, whenever there is a lump sum contract, okay, whenever there is a price fluctuation clause which has been inserted, case by case, the contract price can be altered. So all these four cases come into play. Now there is a fifth case which has not come into a lump sum contract, which I am going to explain to you, wherein the quantities, okay, we have a lot of questions which has been asked by the delegates. How do you tackle the quantity changes, quantity variations, which is reflected within any of the documents? When I say any of the documents, it could be a priced activity schedule, it could be a specification, it could be a drawing. Okay, sometimes you might have seen within the specifications there are schedules which has been mentioned. Let's say a lighting schedule, right? A lighting schedule which indicates a particular number of lightings, right? Is does matter whenever there is a change. Okay. However, the factor which is called the BOQ, right? Bills of quantities. That is a reflection of the quantities in the perception of the person who prepares the BOQ. It is not the correct quantities, right? It cannot be the correct quantities unless you are perfectly proven. For example, if you are using something like building information modeling, that particular model can be taken into account in order to accurately reflect the quantities, right? But however, when you are using a 2D type of a drawing or a sketch, it is very difficult in order for someone to exactly measure the correct quantity, right? Even though you are a very good QS, there may be certain changes, there may be certain fluctuations which comes into play. So the fact a lump sum contract is in place is the BOQ quantities are never used for the valuation purposes. That is what is there, right? And then it comes to the claims. As I have told you, the new engineering contract looks into the claims in a different way as compensation events, wherein the cost associated with that one also is taken into account, right? However, the FIDIC approach regarding the claim is a little bit different. It talks about a relief and it talks about an entitlement. Keep it in your mind the word claim, which has been defined within FIDIC Red Book 2017. The definition itself has embedded the two very vital terms. One is called the uh, relief, the other one is called the entitlement. What is a relief? Okay, a relief is wherever there is a ambiguous detail which has come into play, or a redundant detail which has come into play, which is not requires for the due performance of the contract. Okay, the contractor has an entitlement to say, or a contractor has a relief to say, even though Mr. Employer or the engineer, that you have specified this particular item, right? We are entitled not to do that one because it will create an ambiguity. It is redundant and it is not required for the completion of the works. One of the typical examples would be to have more than one standards in order to have design. The typical example which I'm taking is BS 8110 and Eurocode 2. I think both are designed for the structural design. If you refer the same structural design with two different codes, you have to eradicate one of them. You have to eliminate one of them. Then the contractor has a claim either for a relief or for an entitlement. How a relief is triggered is whenever there is an additional, redundant, which is not required. But an entitlement comes into play when the contractor considered something which is less than which is required, right? But the engineer fails to portray the exact requirement. This is where the thin line between the relief and entitlement comes into play. Whether it is a lump sum contract or a remeasurement type of contract, this particular fact remains the same, right? But there is a change in a remeasurement type of contract because you are always measuring the quantity. Okay, when you are always measuring the quantity, your claim for a quantity change, your claim for a quantity change comes into play. But when you are talking in terms of the concept, when you are talking in terms of the information which has been given to the contractor, uh, it will be common to both lump sum and remeasurement type of a contract. So number one, it says due to not fulfilling obligations under the contract. This is questionable because the obligations of who, right? The claim can be either client-led or the claim can be either the contract-led. I think the delegate has meant that the obligations of both parties, which is inherent to the lump sum contract as well as a remission. Due to a breach of contract, yes, it is there, right? You can add something, the default of the contract by any of the parties. We call it, if the breach is at a higher level, before the breach occurs. Now, if you are a user of FIDIC earlier versions or command conditions of contract, it says that flagrantly, the contractor, they use the word flagrantly. The contractor flagrantly fails to come back into the contractual requirements. So that is a series of events which accumulates in order to come into the context of the breach. We call it a material breach. A material breach is something uh, which is tangible, which is substantial, which is very considerable. And due to force majeure, uh, now the word force majeure has been taken away from the FIDIC 2017 version. Still, the concepts pertaining to the force majeure uh, remains. Okay, so we call them employers' risks, right? And then we'll move on to the next one. Now, we were talking about deletion of two clauses and amendment of two clauses. That's it. Sometimes you might be misunderstood. You might have been misled by this particular slide. You might think, okay, I will delete the second paragraph of subclause 5. I will delete the whole of the clause number 12, and I will amend the subclause 13.3.1, and I will amend the subclause 14.1. Unfortunately, that is not the case when it comes to a lump sum contract. You may have to sweep through the contract itself, and I'll give you ample amount of examples as such, right? Which you need to give some input, which you need to mold the contract into a lump sum type of a contract, right? One of the occurrences is this slide does not explain about what you're going to do with the contract data. Okay, under the contract data, there are certain spaces wherein the contractor has to fill when he or she submits a tender. So that needs to be taken into account when you are doing a change from a remeasurement to the lump sum. And we were talking about the contract price, right? This is just a revisit of what is there, right? The subclause 14.1 of the contract price indicates about the most important thing, unless otherwise stated in the particular conditions. As that particular delegate has quite rightly reflected, the particular conditions, drafting of the particular conditions pertaining to a lump sum contract is a very vital fact. You have to be very careful. The only place the word lump sum appears within the standard form of contract, okay, the word lump sum appears within the standard form of contract is this particular clause. But it does not talk about a lump sum type of contract. The word lump sum appears within the provisions for the molding of the uh, uh, particular conditions, but it does not appear within the general conditions. That is why, in order to avoid the doubt that FIDIC 1999 and 2017 versions, if you take the native one, if you take the original one, it is purely for the remeasurement purposes. Then we talk about what we are going to amend within subclause 14.1. Now, whatever the inherent features which I have told you in the beginning of this session, whilst answering the comment made by our delegate, will be applicable to this. So please closely follow what I am saying. Let's talk about deletion, right? Deletion of a certain subclause within clause 12. You are aware that there are four subclauses within clause 12, which is specifically related to the valuation of the works, right? So when you delete this particular part, when you delete this particular portion of the subclause 14.1, you have to add something, isn't it? Otherwise, it will be incomplete. Under subclause 14.1, it says the contract price. What do you mean by the contract price? It is the defined term for the price of the contract at any time after the accepted contract amount is established. Okay, it is accepted contract amount subjected to changes owing to variations and claims. The contract price shall be the value of the works in accordance with subclause 12 and be subject to adjustments, additions, including cost or cost plus profit, which the contractor is entitled under these conditions, and or the deductions in accordance with the contract. Now, it talks about the valuation. This particular portion in subclause 14.1 talks about how you value the works. It talks about additions, it talks about deductions, right? And then when you supplant this particular section with the other section, the contract price shall be the lump sum accepted contract amount and be subjected to adjustments in accordance with the contract. It does not talk about adjustments, it does not talk about additions, it does not talk about deductions. This you have to keep within your mind once you go. Then it talks about uh, the deletion of another subclause. That is also, as you can see, there is a similarity between subclause 12.3, here clause 12. Whenever you encounter clause 12 or a subclause of clause 12, that is subjected to change when you change the remeasurement contract to a lump sum contract. So this you need to keep within your mind. But does it suffice? No, that is what I'm going to tell you from now on. Right. It says any quantities, whenever the word quantity is taken into account, be careful whether, because as I have told you, there's a rule that quantities are never remeasurement for the purpose of valuation in a lump sum contract. Any quantities which may be set out in the bill of quantities, and it talks about other schedules. Are there any other schedules which is equivalent to a bill of quantity? The answer is yes. We are going to talk about very vital schedule which is being used within the lump sum contract. Are estimated quantities. The word estimated comes into play from the quantity surveys I. The word estimated says it reflects the fact that these quantities are estimated, are not to be taken as the actual and correct quantities of the works which the contract is required to execute or for the purpose of measurement and value. Now it says what we are going to delete here is in the subclause 14.1 it talks number one, you should not take the quantities in the POQ for the purpose of construction or ordering of materials, isn't it? From the procurement perspective. Number two, should it should not be used. Okay, when you delete it, it should not be used. Okay, of the works for the purpose of measurement and valuation. Okay? It says in a what do you call standard remeasurement type of a contract. You should not use the bill of quantity for the measurement and valuation purposes. So that is there. When you eradicate that particular portion, and you need to add certain flavor which is governed by the rules of a lump sum contract. It says any quantities which may be set out in the schedule. It does not talk about the bill of quantities, it talks about a schedule. So, what is this schedule? Keep that question now within your mind. We will move forward. Schedule are estimated quantities and are not to be taken as the actual and correct quantities for the works which the contract is required to execute, right? And it does not talk about the bill of quantities. You can see the difference between the deletion part and the addition part. And it does not talk about the measurement and valuation part. So, what is the alternative? Let us come into that. Lump sum contracts may be suitable. Now, this is a particular condition, special provision, which has been mentioned within FIDIC 2017, which gives you some insight about the changes that you are going to do. A lump sum contracts may be suitable if the tender documents include details which are sufficiently complete for construction and for significant variations to be unlikely. When the delegate was talking about the variations, right, the first item that he or she has been using is the variations. Okay. However, people opt to choose the procurement route. People opt to choose a particular type of a contract based on the fact whether there are variations, much variations, or not much variations. A typical example would be a package plant, a substation, or an accommodation block which has already been specified. Okay, so common type of constructions. I am not talking about unique type of construction or bespoke type of construction. Unique type of constructions are the ones such as hotels, okay, or majlises, or castles, or there are a lot of inputs from the architects, okay, there are a lot of interior changes. But there are common type of constructions. Now, if you are talking about a security guard room, or if you are talking about a road as well, sometimes we feel that the road contracts cannot be lump sum type of. Yes, it could be. It can be, right? So that is, these are the two different things that it is very important in order for you to understand what is the difference between those two, right? Then it talks about subclause 8.5, and we spoke about that. I'm not going to repeat about this, right? Subclause 8.15, a variation that there is, if there is any sort of a quantity variation, they are talking about a quantity variation. That particular portion, now you should remember, this is one of the major things that we were talking about. The previous versions of the FIDIC was talking about additions, right? For the extension of time clause, they were talking about additional work. But later on, FIDIC identified uh, an omission could also be a trigger. An omission could also be a cause for an extension of time. You might be thinking, how? Now, for example, let's say you omit certain part of the works, right? But because of that particular omission, you may have to change. I'm not saying add, you may have to change the specification of certain other areas. Okay, so that, if this is based on the timing of the instruction of the variation, that may fall into the critical path as well. So if you see the Oman conditions of contract, you are talking about additional work. Any additional work may trigger an extension of time. It does not talk about any omission. But FIDIC identified even an omission can also contribute to an extension of time. That is why they supplanted the word addition with the word variation. Okay. So in the first place, when you are talking about that particular claims for EOT, they are talking about 10%. If there is any sort of a change in the quantities. Now this strengthens. Okay. Why do you delete this subclause 8.5? Because lump sum contracts do not talk about quantities for the purpose of valuations. When you're talking about valuations, evaluations also is a part of it, right? Evaluations is standard EOT, right? Like that. So that is also given here. Then we are talking about there is no change in the subclauses, other subclauses, right? Now this is one of the very important subclauses, subclause 13.3.1, which talk about the adjustment to the contract price by valuing a variation, right? In accordance with clause 12, the C part that you are seeing in the third paragraph is the one where you are going to delete. That is why I colored it in red. The C part with the green color is what I am going to add. Now let us read between the lines. It says, by valuing the variation in accordance with clause 12. Okay, so that means you are not valuing the variation in accordance with clause 12. That is clear, isn't it? With supporting particulars, now you may be having a question mark. Are we going to take out the supporting particulars? The answer is there within the other paragraph. It starts with supporting particulars. So that means if there is an adjustment to the contract price under a variation, the supporting particulars are universal, irrespective of the fact either whether it is a remeasurement contract or lump sum contract. Whenever the omission of any work forms part of or all of a variation, and if the contractor has incurred or will incur costs, which, if the work had not been omitted, would have been deemed to be covered by a sum forming part of the accepted contract amount. Now, it is talking about this particular story, but the change was the red colored portion by valuing the variation in accordance with clause 2. Right? Now you can see there is certain additional parts which has been mentioned here, right? Which you can go through, right? Because it says, now for example, it says from here, if the parties have agreed to the omission of any work which is to be carried out by others, the contractor's proposal may also include the amount for any loss of profit and other losses and damages suffered or to be suffered by the contractor. So this is given, right, as an additional portion into this one. If you do a side-by-side comparison, you will understand what it is. Now, there is a clause, sub-clause 14.4, which says that if there is any sort of a change within the activity schedule, so I am using that particular word for the first time. Now you must be familiar with that one if you have administered a lump sum contract. An activity schedule, I will show you another question raised by another delegate, and he or she has given us an activity schedule, and I'll be discussing some questions which has been raised by him or her, right? uh, which talks about an activity schedule. Now, the difference between an activity schedule and a bill of quantities is an activity schedule always links with a particular activity. You might have heard about the work breakdown structure, right? BOQ is essentially mentioned as a cost breakdown structure as opposed to a breakdown structure. This is why it is difficult for you to marry the work breakdown structure with the cost breakdown structure. Have any of you attempted to do a cost loaded program? I'm sure if you are from an engineering background, you might have a lot of fights with the quantity survey. If you are from a quantity surveying background, you might have a lot of fights with the engineer. This is where the program, the work breakdown structure does not marry with the work breakdown, cost breakdown structure, you have a problem in cost loading the program. I still remember when I was doing one next year's development project, it took hours and hours in order for us to embed the costs which were there within the BOQ into an activity. But in a lump sum contract, you won't have that problem because it is activity based. So it is very straightforward. Once a particular lump sum activity has been completed, this is the cost which will be incurred by the contractor. This is the cost which will be price which will be paid to the contractor. We can talk about that. So variation by instruction, that particular clause has been amended in this way in order to accommodate the inherent features of a lump sum contract. Now, deletion of clause 12. Now, you might be worrying when you delete something. It is very difficult to understand what are we going to do with these mechanisms embedded within these particular subclauses. Now, when you are talking about the clause 12, the FIDIC Red Book suggests that the clause 12 has to be totally deleted. So what will happen to these four aspects? We are going to explore. Works to be measured, Okay, that we understood to a certain extent. What about the method of measurement? Are we going to, are we not going to have a method of measurement? What about the valuation? Are we not going to value the works? What will happen with the omissions? So those are the four questions that will come into your mind when you're talking about uh, this particular session, right? And then we will move on to the uh, paragraphs, which is in this particular sub clauses. And before coming into that paragraphs, I just wanted to get a small sort of this approach in the FIDIC NAC. Let me start with this particular slide, which talks about schedule of payments in the FIDIC, activity schedule in NEC option 1A. So the related term or the like term within the NEC option A is activity schedule. Where in FIDIC terminology, we are not using that one. We are using schedule of payments. So this is one of the major changes that we observe within FIDIC as well as NEC. What you can see on the top is the FIDIC Guidebook 2017 version cover, and what you can see on the bottom is the NEC 4, New Engineering Contract 4, we call it the Black Book. Both have been issued in 2007. So they are like peers, they are like contemporaries who have taken into account the problems within the construction industry, who have taken into account certain features of the construction industry in the same fashion. Now, for example, you might have heard that Housing Grants Regeneration Act, okay, we call it HGC, Housing Grants Construction and Regeneration Act, HGCRA. If you go through, if you peruse the Housing Grants Regeneration Act, in one place they say the payment should be done in piecemeal basis as the work progresses. So that is a stipulation which has been imposed by the law. Therefore, any contract which was drafted after 1996 should inherit the fact that you should not pay a full lump sum towards the end of the contract. It should have been a portion. It should have been paid based on the progress made. Otherwise, it is illegal. Likewise, Housing Grants Regeneration Act introduces something called the back-to-back payment. We call it pay when paid type of payment. It was prohibited by Housing Grants Regeneration Act. You might have observed that most of the contractors, they are, if they are not well financed, or if their cash flow is having certain issues pertaining to their earnings, they may have to opt to go for a pay when paid clause, but it is illegal as far as this Housing Grants Regeneration Act is concerned. So that is some additional information. Now, before going into the FIDIC approach, this activity schedule, if you see the NEC 4, clause 55 talks about this particular term called activity schedule. There are certain flavors of new engineering contract that will be useful for you in order for you to understand this particular terminology, right? Some disturbances, I would appreciate if you uh, mute your microphones. Okay, thank you. Right. The information in an activity schedule is not if you think about muting the mic, otherwise it is difficult, it's a bit disturbing. Otherwise, I will have to mute you. I muted all of them. Can you hear me now? Just someone can text a message saying that you can hear me. I got 2 messages. Yes. Yes. Okay. Very good. Perfect. Thank you so much. Right. When you are talking about an activity schedule, the information in the activity schedule is not scope or site information. So this is very important, right? The activity schedule, which is being given in the NEC option A, is very clearly mentioning it is not the scope or site information, right? If the activities on the activity schedule do not relate to the scope, the contractor corrects the activity schedule, right? The contractor has to correct the activity schedule if it is not acceptable to the employer. And then it goes and goes, it says, now it needs to be married with the accepted program. It needs to be married with the it needs to be married with the uh, program which is workable. Okay, we talk about the workable program here. Number two says the changes a plan if the contractor changes a planned method of working. That is, we call it a method statement at its discretion. Okay, so that the activities on the activity schedule do not relate to the operations of the accepted program, or corrects the activity schedule so that the activities on the activity schedule relate to the scope. So they are talking about accepted program, they are talking about scope. The contractor submits a revision to the activity schedule to the project manager for acceptance. Now, this triggers a question, right? Can the contractor change the activity schedule? As per NEC option A, yes, it could be, right? And then it says a reason for not accepting a revision of the activities, because some of the engineers are very stubborn. They will say, Mr. Contractor, you would have easily foreseen this before, right? And then it does not relate to the operations in the accepted program, okay? Because the contractor comes up with an activity schedule, suppose it was triggered by a variation, right? Any change prices are not reasonably distributed between the activities which are not completed. Now, the total of the prices is changed. So there are reasons for the engineer not to accept the activity schedule, a revision, because the accepted activity schedule is part of the contract. Even though the program is not a part of the contract in the FIDIC terminology, right? The activity schedule is says it does not relate to the operations on the accepted program. So suppose the contractor submits a revision to the activity schedule which is beyond the accepted program, it will be declined, it will be denied. Any change prices are not reasonably distributed between the activities which are not completed. Okay, whenever there is a change in the prices, okay, if they are not reasonably distributed between the activities which are not completed, so that normally happens whenever there is a variation which has been incurred. Suppose a particular activity is talking about a 1 kilometer long road, but to some reason it needed to be changed to 900 kilometers, right? So the change prices needs to be distributed in an appropriate manner. Once again, it does not talk about the quantities. The total of the price is changed. So if the total of the prices is changed, right, without a variation, it does not mean does not mean that the engineer must approve the activity schedule. This is what the NEC option one approach is there. Now, after this one, there is one good document which was written by NEC regarding how the comprehension of this lump sum contracts, drafting a lump sum contract using NEC option A. It is like a off-the-shelf type of a contract. You don't have to do any changes because it is meant for a lump sum contract. So that is the difference between NEC option A and the FIDIC 2017 version as well, right? Right. Then the NEC approach says the activity schedule is the then it says activity schedule with italics is a defined term unless later changed in accordance with the contract. So there is a defined term here. Defined cost is the cost of the components of the shorter schedule of the cost components. So these are some related things, but I just wanted to highlight some of the things in the um, option A. Item 30 specifically says the prices are the lump sum prices for each of the activities. So now you can see the flavor of NEC somewhat resembles the flavor of FIDIC when you see the schedule later on the activity schedule unless later changed in accordance with this contract. So it talks about that, right? Now we are moving on to subclause, which explains specifically about what do you know what is called as schedules, right? Purpose of subclause 14.4. The general conditions contains provisions for interim payments to the contract that we all know. That is a remeasurement type of a contract, which may be based on schedule of payments, right? If another basis is to be used for determining interim valuations, details should be added in the special provision. Now this talks about a lump sum contract, okay? Because in a remeasurement type of a contract also there are schedule of payments. Because if you go to the um, valuation clause number 12, it talks about the bill of quantities as well as other schedules, right? But this particular schedule of payments, then I go a little bit up. It says schedule of payments for the lump sum contract payment mechanism is there, right? Now, then it talks about this particular change. If payments are to be specified in a schedule of payments, the minimum amount of interim certificates may be omitted from the contract data. See, this is one of the things which has not been captured within that provision for the change from remeasurement contract to lump sum contract. And consideration may be given to the schedule of payments being in one of the following forms, right? Then it says how to address this one. An amount or a percentage of the estimated final contract price. I'm sure that you all are aware of the percentage of final contract price for each month of other period during the time for completion. But this can prove unreasonable if the contractor's progress differs significantly from the expectation of the schedule. That is one of them, right? Amounts based on the actual progress achieved by the contractor in executing the works, which necessitates careful definition of the payment milestone. Now, you might have captured another term called milestone payment, right? Now, this milestone payments is a very common feature which is appearing in certain industries, right? Especially this oil and gas industry. When I was working in one of the petroleum organizations, contractor, we encountered this milestone payment strategy, and we had a problem with the value. The problem here is it was some sort of a hybrid version, right? Milestone payments were included within one schedule. In another schedule, we were asked to price a BOQ. Okay. Now, when we priced the BOQ, right, it was sort of a post-mortem that we had to do, right? We realized the fact that some of the milestones attracts lower costs, and some of the milestones attracts higher costs. For example, if the contract says that the completion of the MEP works, okay, completion in the sense the commissioning also is done. Normally, we know that an MEP works in a building project will be in the region of 35 to 40%, right? So the milestone payment for MEP works, when we exactly priced that one, came to 37%, wherein milestone payment, actual milestone payment was 25%. So the downside of it, or the flip side of the coin is that it is a sort of a backloaded, sorry, front-loaded type of a BOQ. So it is as far as the consultant's perception is concerned, he might have thought some of the MEP works, even though the actual cost is 35%, the contractors use this strategy in order to achieve money earlier, so that they can they can elevate the what do you call supply chain circle, right? Supply chain, and they can appoint the subcontractors early. They have a smooth cash flow. So even though the price of a MEP works is 35%, in reality what they normally do is they front load, right? They do certain rates pertaining to the structure because they know the structure will be finished earlier, right? So they will have more money than actual amount that they are paying, so that their cost value reconciliation will be a healthy one, okay, rather than towards the end of the project. So the engineer, in his perception, thought that the contractor would have been front loaded that, but the contractor did not do that. Therefore, there was a disparity between the milestone payment as well as the BOQ. So when you're using a hybrid version, you have to be careful because people are using hybrid versions in the market. So if somebody asks whether you're using a BOQ for a lump sum contract, yes, some people they are using a BOQ for a lump sum. But the FIDIC specifically says it needs to be a schedule of activities. Okay? The correct terminology which is being used is schedule of payments. But in the what do you call NEC, they are using activity schedule. Now, subclause 14.4. Now, these are the things that when you go more into the nitty-gritty of the changes of the remeasurement contract. Now, if you see subclause 4.4 in a lump sum contract, okay, in a lump sum contract, it says if the contract includes, it's in the general contract. I will tell what needs to be changed here, right? Um, if the contract includes schedule of payments specifying the installments in which the contract price will be paid, then unless otherwise stated in the schedule, the installments, they use the word installments quoted in the schedule of payments, right? I will show you a schedule of payments later on in this session, shall be treated as the estimated contract values for the purpose of subparagraph 1, application 4. When it goes to the remeasurement contract, the statement shall include, now for example, values for the purposes of subparagraph 1 in subclause. This is not the normal one. So that means in place of a bill of quantities, if you are using a schedule of payments, you need to alter something. Okay? That alteration is the one which shows within these two clauses. Those are, we call it complementary. Okay. So one explains the other. So you have to be careful when you're drafting a lump sum contract. When you are, it is already embedded within the standard form of contract, but most people are unable to comprehend because they go for only the changes which has been done. Right here, it says the subparagraph 1 of subclause 13.4, application point interim payment, says talks about the estimated contract value of the works executed and the contractor's documents produced up to the end of the payment period, including variations and all these things, right? Here they are talking about the installments quoted in the schedule of payments. Now, for example, let's say you're talking about the foundation. In order for the construction of the total foundation, the activity schedule of payments might have told full excavation should be this particular lump sum amount. Okay, then full completing of the this thing is what you call the foundation is this lump sum amount. So those are the installments pertaining to the schedule of payments. This sort of a adherence, this sort of a culture or this sort of a mechanism is not available within the BOQs. That is why there is a difference when you change from the BOQ to a schedule of payments. You need to read these clauses in a different way, right? When you're talking about this purpose I have speaking about, right? This once again you can read. This is some sort of an elongation of the same subclause 14.4, right? And it goes a little further about certain changes, right? Now, paragraph 2, right, of the subclause 14.4 says, if the contract does not include a schedule of payments. Now, there are certain lump sum contracts also which doesn't have schedule of payments. The contractor shall submit non-binding estimates. What are the non-binding estimates? If there is a particular item which has not been foreseen, which has been omitted within this particular schedule of payments. Now, in order to avoid that sort of a thing, normally what the engineers are doing is when they prepare this activity schedule, right, schedule of payments, they mention in the last line any other activities that in the contractor's opinion is applicable. Then they ask them to price that down. So that that covers the entirety, that covers the whole requirement. So non-binding estimates of the payments which the contractor expects to become due to during each period of 3 months. It talks about non-binding. I spoke about non-binding estimates. That means the estimates are not contractually bound because at the time of signing the contract, right, these estimates were not there. That is why we call them as non-binding estimates. And this needs to be given in each 3-month period. The first estimate shall be submitted within 42 days after the commencement date. Okay. So this is where, whenever there is no schedule of payments, how this thing will play. Right. And then it talks about subclause 12.1. That is the first subclause. That is why I specifically mentioned delete. Right. Now you need to find certain ways and means how this has these mechanisms. Okay. How this mechanism has been supplanted within the lump sum type of a contract, because it talks about the contractor to come and agree on a stipulated date of measurement, right? So this is how in most of the contracts that we are administering in the world, the contractors representatives come and the engineers representatives or quantity surveyors come, and then they figure out what are the things, what are the changes that they need to do. Right? Likewise, happening. However, in a lump sum contract, that particular portion is missed. Therefore, when it is missed, that you need to stipulate when you are drafting the specific provisions, you need to stipulate the certain dates for valuation. You know that in most of the commercial meetings, even though the standard form of contract talks about these dates here, we agree on some practical dates. Now, for example, if you are talking about a valuation of the end of the month, we will talk about 25th rather than 31st or 30th of the month, because it is more practical, because 25th, otherwise some clients, they do have, they are closing their financial month by 31st. Sometimes because of that fact, it is difficult to get it on 31st itself. As I know that there is some time frame which is involved in that one, but always we are talking about 28 days, okay, and then 56 days. Okay, 28 days is for the engineer to evaluate the right. And then we are talking about the measurement on site or examines the measurement records. So in a lump sum contract, one of the good things about that is remeasurement is not there. So when remeasurement is not there, most of the time we go by the activity and we go by the percentage completion of the activity. So without doing a remeasurement, because always you need to understand this particular concept. Always the quantity which is stipulated in the BOQ and the remeasurement quantity, when you're talking about the FIDIC Red Book, the remeasurement version are two different things. So sometimes the BOQ quantities will become again obsolete, right? But when you're talking about an activity, right? When you're talking about an activity, a percentage completion of the activity, right, can be measured based on a cost loaded program, or can be measured in terms of the progress charts, right? How you give the progress. Sometimes it is aligned in a lump sum contract that the amount that you gain, right? The amount that is called earn value analysis, right? The amount that you gain by completing a particular task marries with that particular activity because it is that particular activity has been loaded as a lump sum item. So this is why I'm reverting back to the fact that sometimes the construction progress and the measurement progress or the cost progress are two different things. The people ask sometimes, if it is a 10 million contract and you're talking about 10 million, I'm talking about 10 million. So if you are in Sri Lanka, that you have to multiply. Now it has come very closer to 500. A lot of pain about that, right? Because the rupee is going down. So in Indian rupees, it is also about 250, I think. Not quite sure. Right? However, this gives you a little bit of an insight about how you do the measurement. Mostly, it is based on the percentage progress, right? So when you are working very closely with the planner, mostly you can answer these sort of things, right? Right. Then we are talking about after receiving the contractor's notice, okay, under the subclause works to be measured. Again, it talks about time limits. It talks about the limit of agreements and all this. So there should be something which needs to cover that one, right? So in a lump sum type of a contract, always you can agree for a time period for doing some sort of a agreed version for payment, right? Or milestone payments. So normally there is one of the mechanisms which is being used in a lump sum contract is milestone completion certificate, right? When a milestone is completed, the engineer issues a certificate. So that is pursuant to work inspection request. Then the method of measurement. Now people will ask whether you need a method of measurement in preparing a lump sum type of contract. Now, the problem here is, right, in order to have an activity schedule, right, no matter whether there is a BOQ or not, right, people need to understand how long will it take in order to complete this particular task, isn't it? So that sort of a thing is required when you are talking about a method of measurement, right? So, for example, if it is a road project that we are talking about, session 3 or 4 that we are using, so that will give you a little bit of insight about the tasks that you are undertaking, right? Then the valuation of the works, right? Now, as I have told you, when you are deleting the full close here, right? Uh, the engineer shall value each item of work except as otherwise stated in the contract. The engineer shall value each item of work by applying the measurement agreed or determined in accordance with subclauses 12.1 and 2 and the appropriate rate or price for the item. Now, as I have told you, whenever there is no appropriate rate, okay, or price for the particular item, right, for the purpose of valuation, right, this particular clause or this particular subclause become redundant because we have a separate way of measuring that. That is why the valuation of the works is also not coming into play. Right. Now, once again, we were talking about an omission, right? Because this particular subclause within FIDIC Red Book is talking about an omission, right? This particular omission says the value of which has not otherwise been agreed. Okay, let me just explain from the beginning. Whenever the omission of any work forms part of a variation, it is very important that you need to understand this particular notion. The value of which has not otherwise been agreed. Because sometimes when you omit part of the work, it is not a very straightforward situation, right? Suppose that in your external envelope that you have got 100 GRC screens. Okay, when you have got 100 GRC screens, and suppose that you deduct 50% of that. Normally, a GRC screen has got a rate embedded within that one for the mold. Okay, because the mold is costly. Am I right? So the economy of scale comes into play whenever that change has occurred. Right now, the situation is different when you are talking about a remeasurement contract. Suppose in the BOQ that you have got 100, but you actually need to do 80. Okay, so then what will the contractor do? A smart contractor will do, right? He knows that he has to construct only 80, right? Even though the BOQ says it is 100. So he will put the value of that particular mold within 80 numbers of GRC screen, but not within 100 number of GRC screens, and then expend the rate by that particular. But when it comes to lump sum contract, okay, the value of the 100 screens or that particular activity for the completion of the GRC screens, there is one lump sum figure. That lump sum figure is not changed. Okay? That lump sum figure remains the same. Therefore, the, the outcome of that is whenever you introduce a variation, the way that the mechanism is changing affects the contract. That is why we are saying that in a lump sum contract, quantity changes is the risk of the contract, right? Because the employer, even though the BOQ or activity schedule does not talk about the quantity, right? It talks about the activity. But in that particular activity, you might have thought, how do you define whenever there is an omission for a particular rate? Okay, then the situation is changed. In a remeasurement type of a contract, you're talking about 100, right? But in a lump sum type of a contract, you're talking about the actual work which needs to be done. And you don't talk about either 80 or you don't talk about 100. But whenever there is an omission which is there, in order to understand what sort of a percentage needs to be deducted, the engineer or the quantity survey should have an idea about what is the extent of the work. Now, this occurs whenever there is an omission occurs. Okay, right? Because sometimes there are certain situations which may arise related to the non-agreement of the variations. That is why the lump sum contracts are more suitable for there are less variations. Okay, so then the contractor will incur cost which, if the work had not been omitted, would have been deemed to be covered by a sum forming part of the accepted contract amount. Now, this is also right talking about the work had not been omitted; it is part of the accepted contract. Okay, so that talks about that the omission of the work will result this sum not forming part of the contract, and this now there are certain four things which is there, and then at the end it says then the contractor shall in the contractor's proposal under subparagraph subclause 41 variation by instruction give details to the engineer accordingly with details supporting particulars. Now he needs to go through each and every elements of this particular thing, but you normally in a lump sum contract you normally do not have this particular methodology. So whenever there is some sort of an omission, sometimes it is difficult. Once again, I'm telling you that this is why the lump sum contracts are more suitable for less variations, right? And then we will go into the some details related to case study. Right. This is an extract from a road work, wherein you can see the lump sum price has not been given because it is confidential. right? But this is how the activity-based schedule looks like. Okay, so it talks about sub-activities. Certain activities are there, right? Now, the first thing is, what if there is a mismatch between the contract and actual? So I believe this contract needs to be altered to contract, right? What if there is a mismatch between the contract and actual? Now, once again, going back to the scenario, right? Uh, what is the contract? The contract is the amount of data where the contractor has priced the particular document and offered a price. Now, you know that if you are talking about the defined terms within FIDIC terminology, it encompasses what are the documents which is forming the contract. The contract which started with the capital C, which includes the documents forming the contract, right? Now, the, if there is a mismatch between the contract and the actual, first and foremost, you need to identify which triggered this, which fact triggered this, the mismatch. Okay, because there are ample amount of clauses embedded within the FIDIC Red Book for the variations. Okay, right? For the discrepancies and ambiguities, right? So when you're talking about a mismatch, it could either be a discrepancy, it could either be an ambiguity. Now let me give you a real life example which I encountered when I was practicing, right? It is a real life example. In the specification, there was a particular wording called uh, for a glass mosaic tiles. Okay, the glass mosaic tiles, which was specified within the specification, is called Bisasa or equivalent. You know, Bisasa is a very expensive brand which is coming from Italy, right? So it says Bisasa or equivalent, right? But within the drawing, it says another brand saying Mosaic or equivalent. So now you can understand there is a mismatch because Mosaic is not an expensive brand, but Bisasa is an expensive brand. Now let us look into the fact that if there is a remeasurement contract and a lump sum contract, how the situation will change, right? Now, in a remeasurement contract, when you're talking about the quantities, okay, you know that there is nothing new about this. Uh, when there is a quantity change, you have to claim for the change in the quantity. But when there is a mismatch, how do you get that particular fact into account? Now it is like this. Now in a lump sum contract, uh, the rule is that BOQ quantities are never remeasured for variation purposes, right? Now forget about the fact that we are talking about a quantity here, but we need to establish a rate. Okay, because what has gone to the contract has not changed. Okay, what has gone to the contract as a specification or a drawing has not changed, right? However, it is the duty of both the engineer and the contractor to first identify what is the mismatch. Okay, this could have been done at the time of tendering, or this could have been done after the signing of the contract. But you know, we call it good faith and fair dealing in this part of the world. That means when you encounter a mismatch as such, because some people, if they feel that it is unfair for them, they may not come up with the. But we are talking about the benefit of the project. Now, if there is a mismatch between the contract and actual as far as the quantity is concerned, as I have told you, a lump sum contract, the quantity risk lies with the contractor. Therefore, you have to build as per the drawings. So this is one of the thumb rules. Okay, you have to build as per the drawing, irrespective of the fact whether the BOQ or schedule, whatever it is, gives a quantity. But if there is a specification, okay, because specification is above the drawing. Okay. Sometimes a lighting schedule. This is one of the typical examples. The lighting schedule embedded within the specification says a particular type of chandeliers, let's say 3 chandeliers are required for the completion of the works, right? However, when you go to the drawing, you will see there are only 2. Okay. So at the time of pricing, the contractor had thought for the completion of the activity called the chandeliers, okay, he had to price 3 because schedule says 3, right? Now, let's say the actual requirement is 2 and the contract has erroneously changed that one. Now the priority of the documents comes into play, right? And then for this particular activity, the contract, it is not beneficial to the contract, okay? But think about the other way around. Now this is why sometimes the plus side as well as the minus side should be thought. If it gives the same sort of an attraction, yes, because whether or not you are earning or you are losing, right? If the situation is on the other hand side, you have to think from the empathy point of view. Now, the contractor has priced, maybe he is aware of the fact that there are only 2 required, or maybe he's not aware of the fact that there are only 2 required. Now, as per the drawings, this is what you want to do. As per the specification, this is how we are going to do. Now, this is the flip side of the coin. But in the priority of the documents, it says the contractor has to price based on the, when there is a discrepancy or a mismatch, you have to price based on the price priority of the document. So you have priced for 3 chandeliers. Then the engineer or the employer is eligible to ask, right? Eligible to ask whenever there is a change. Okay, whenever there is a change to the contract, the engineer is eligible to ask for it. Say, but when there is no change, and the actual fact, whenever there is no change to the contract document, okay, that particular privilege inherited by the engineer or the employer will go away. So this is what you need to come into play. Now, when you are talking about what if there are incompatible lump sum figures, that is another thing which says, now for example, incompatible lump sum figure is, now I can again cite another example which I encountered. For a laying of 240 cable, LV cables, right? There were 3 road stretches in a particular mixed-use development project. That these 3 routes have got 3 different rates. It was a BOQ-driven remeasurement type of contract. But if it comes into a lump sum type of contract, how you take into account whenever there is an incompatibility of the lump sum figures when you are assessing a variation. So there are a couple of approaches that people have adapted. That is also based on this particular provisions. Sometimes when you're talking about the, that if that particular change has been introduced in a particular road, now let's say we have got roads A, B, and C. Now, once again, you have to think about the perspective which is called, which should not trigger an unjust enrichment. That is a legal imposition. Unjust enrichment is that you should not be paying for, you should not be getting an advantage out of the situation to acquire more assets than it is required, than you are eligible for. So suppose that this 240 cable within road A has got a less rate, and this 240 cable in road B has got a higher rate. But the change introduced are both for road A and road B. Okay. Now, which rate will prevail? Okay. That you may have a argument in a lump sum contract, because you know, once again I'm saying, BOQ quantities are never remeasured for valuation of variations. But here the situation is for a variation. Okay, where there is an omission, let's say. Right? So then what you think from the contractor's perspective. Now, from the contractor's perspective, whenever the lump sum contract does not talk about a rate, okay, you are not eligible to talk about an apportionment of the rate based on the quantity. If it is a remeasurement contract, you can apply an what do you call we call it as a what do you call weighted average. Now, for example, 100 meters of road A has got this rate cables, and 150 road stretch this rate. There is one approach. What you are going to do is you get the weighted average in order to get the correct rate. It's the similar type of the work. Okay, so the engineer has to adopt the approach for the weighted average. But in this particular lump sum type of a contract, you do not consider the BOQ quantities. So therefore, you have to adapt a different strategy in order to identify. Sometimes you may go for first principles, or sometimes you may go for the contractor's total lump sum figure, right? From the total lump sum figure, right, you will identify what is the percentage of that particular change. So that based on that particular percentage, you can come into some sort of an assessment pertaining to that particular change. Now, in this particular example, they are talking about preliminaries, site clearing, earthworks, bases and shoulder works, surface application, and then there's another item called provide and maintain project name board. There are different items that have got lump sum. Now, whenever there is a sort of a specification change, right? Suppose that bases and shoulder work embedded within this particular sub-activity is talking about a base where you change the size of the base. Okay, size of the base is changed. That means you are changing the thickness of the base, right? Then there is a rate. There is a rate that you can come into play when you are talking about working from first principles, right? Because sometimes when you are talking about a rate which is included within a lump sum contract, right? Now, in this part of the world, we encounter this problem to a greater extent, that rate does not correctly reflect. The rate does not correctly reflect the actual rate, because whenever there is a quantity error, right? Whenever there is a quantity error, the rate does not reflect the actual value of the works, right? Sometimes the contractors are using a smart approach, which is called this is the art of tendering, right? If the contractor feels the engineer has erroneously put a lesser quantity in a particular BOQ item, right? That particular rate, that particular quantity needs to be increased in reality. Okay, in reality, that particular quantity needs to be increased. When you talk about that particular quantity needs to be increased, the contractor, what they do is they put a higher rate, because the reflection of the higher rate within the contract value or the accepted contract amount is less when you speak about a total value, right? Because the quantity is actually lesser than what is required. So in a remeasurement type of a contract, the contractor is tempting to put a higher rate into that one, right? But in lump sum contracts, okay, in lump sum contracts, the contractor, even though he is tempting to put a higher rate or lower rate, he needs to put a lump sum price. So he thinks about the end result. Okay, he thinks about the end results whenever there is no change in the contract document. Okay, whenever there is no change in the contract document, It is immaterial. It is immaterial whether the quantity which is looked into by the contractor or someone stated that one. You have to put the correct value. You have to put the correct total price into this one. So the difference is whenever there is a variation, okay, unlike a remeasurement type of a contract, whenever there is a variation, it is difficult to assess when you compare with the previous, what do you call, when you compare with the remeasurement type of a contract. And then there's another question: what if the works have been carried out rather than within the specified bill? Now this is another thing, right? Somebody asked this particular question. Let me just go through that one, right? What if the works have been what if the works have been carried out rather than within the specified bill? Okay. Now, this is also normally happening, right? I'll tell you the reason for that one. Uh, the specified bill has got specified activities. So, how do you marry those activities with the works that you are executing based on the drawings, or maybe based on the specification? Now, the question is, what if the works have been carried out other than within the specified bill? So there may be two cases. One is the drawings specify a particular work which is not there within the activity description. Okay, so for that the engineers use the terminology called, as I have told you, there are two ways of looking into this one. Normally in a lump sum contract, when there is a provision at the end of each bill, if there is any sort of a work which has not been considered within this activity schedule, the contractor has to price that one. Okay, but if it is not there, in the instructions to tenderers, you see that one. In the instructions to tenderers, normally it says any item which is included within the drawings and specification, right? Uh, that it is construed that the contractor has priced elsewhere. So this is based on the type of a particular contract which is being drafted. Normally, once again, coming back to this situation, we have to think from the fair point of view. Now, the NEC approach, the new engineering contract approach, is the most easiest. What they are saying is it has to be very closer to a cost reimbursable type of a contract whenever there is a variation, because the terms and conditions at the time of signing the contract are cast in concrete, right? Unless there is a discrepancy or unless there is a mismatch which needs to be corrected, right? But if there is something which is qualifying that particular mismatch, okay, this is what I'm saying, that those are the two strategies that the drafters of the contract are play here coming into account. Number one is at the end of each bill, it says if there is any items which is missing within this particular bill of quantities or activities, schedule of activities, you should have a price for that one. So this is the real essence of a lump sum contract, right? But if that particular part is missing, now the contract has some sort of a room, even though it is a lump sum contract. Okay, even though it is a lump sum contract, then the principle which comes into play is called the contra preferential. Okay, contractor did not have, okay, contractor did not have an opportunity to price this item because that particular activity schedule has missed a very important item. Okay, now from the common law perspective also, you can understand that one. When you give someone to draft something, why should the person who is receiving that particular drafted document be penalized? Okay, so this is the question which should come into your mind, even though it is a lump sum contract or a remeasurement type of a contract. What comes into your mind is always the common law principle. And then there are two complementary clauses which is coming into play. One is called the quantum merit. Quantum merit is called it is a Latin term for the as much as he or she worked. That is called the quantum merit, right? And then the unjust enrichment. Okay, unjust enrichment is that when you have not worked for a particular work, right? But you are getting something more than this one, right? Now, for example, a typical example would be something like this. Now, suppose by the mistake of the engineer, suppose by the mistake of the engineer, the specification pertaining to a particular chandelier, okay, has been changed from gold to let's say copper. Okay, the chandelier as per the specification is copper. Now the employer wants a gold chandelier. Okay, then the employer comes to the engineer and say, Mr. Engineer, you have done this mistake. This needs to be done in gold. Then the engineer changes that one. If the employer contra charge from the engineer for that particular change from gold to copper, right? The, the employer is unjustly enriched. Okay, so this is called unjust enrichment. You can charge only the difference between the gold at that time, at the time of issuing the variation, and at the time of signing the contract, because that is the benefit foregone to the employer. So for all these questions related to lump sum contracts, what I can tell you is think from the common law perspective. Okay, think from the common law perspective, but there is a one golden rule that you need to understand. The quantities are immaterial when you are assessing that. Okay, quantities are immaterial, but the lump sums are material. So there are certain hybrid versions which has been used, especially in Oman. I can see that there is a version called actual and correct. Okay, some people interpret this in such a way that actual and correct only. This only in Oman I have seen this one, right? This clause 56 in Oman conditions of contract is called actual and correct. However, this particular actual and correct approach is somewhat different from remeasurement as well as a lump sum. Okay, the actual and correct approach is quite interesting. It says if there is a change in the quantities, the engineer shall issue an instruction. Okay, the engineer shall issue an instruction in order to change that quantity. Right? Then somebody will ask the question: why we can if there is a change for any item, that we can issue an instruction. So there is some sort of a doubt about that. But the clause 56 actual and correct scenario that we are using in Oman is somewhat different from here in the type of lump sum contracts. Some say actual and correct lump sum. Okay, so there are certain hybrid versions that we are using in this particular situation as well. So this is about that one. And one other thing, one other important thing is about the priority of the documents. I will once again recite that one. This priority of the documents, when you are talking about the priority of the documents in a contract, you should understand always what is required. Okay, it is not what is price. Now the most people misunderstand and miscomprehend that one. uh, since you have priced for this particular item, okay, you have to bill for this particular rate. Now it is not the thing. The driving force or the driving reason for that particular one is, okay, first and foremost, the driving force for that one is what is the actual requirement at site. The actual requirement at site problem needs to be solved first. Once you solve that problem, then it triggers a question whether there is an additional cost, whether there is a saving, or they have to do in the same cost. So this is some people, they mix these two things. They mingle these two things and come up with a sort of a wrong version which says if the contractor has price for something, he has to do it for that one. And then people are talking about, okay, the specification has got a higher requirement and the drawings have got a lower requirement. Now in this part of the world, in Oman conditions of contract, drawings takes the precedence over the specification, as opposed to the FIDIC 99 and other versions, right? Drawings take the precedence. Therefore, you have to take very carefully what exactly is the requirement. If the requirement is based on the drawing, okay, if the requirement under one conditions of contract, if the requirement is based on the drawing, the contractor is construed to be pricing this particular item based on a drawing. Okay, so if the requirement is based on the specification, okay, whether it is high cost or low cost, the contractor has considered the cost of the drawing, not the cost of the specification. This is what we need to understand. Oman conditions of contract says they are mutually explanatory, but in order to eliminate that problem, some engineers, they put this within the instructions to tenderers, should there be a discrepancy or ambiguity within the pricing of the document. Drawings takes precedence over the specification. This is how it comes. But in the FIDIC context, it is very clearly written now. The specification takes precedence over the drawings at the time of pricing, but not at the time of lease. So this is how it is all about, right? So this is what is all about this lump sum contract thing seminar, right? And then I wanted to sort of highlight what we have done, learning outcomes, right? Um, we understood what are the lump sum contracts and their definitions. And we compared the lump sum contracts with other procurement and payment mechanisms. And we did a case study on cost delivery reconciliation. We did features. We spoke about the features of FIDIC credit book lump sum contracts. And drafting a lump sum contract using FIDIC credit book has been defined. And then brush up some areas of RICS core technical competency called commercial management in construction. Right? And then based on that, we have done a successful series 2-day session. And if you have a few questions, you can ask right now, or else I will just publish this on. You can ask questions through emails also, right? And then you can ask questions through WhatsApp if you want as well, right? I will just type in my email ID. So this is about it, and I do not happen to see you again. I wish you a very happy new year, right? And if there is anything that you wanted to ask, you can either text it or you can ask it now, or else I'll be answering any questions that you'll be having in about 5 to 10 minutes time. Okay, well, thank you very much. And please do ask questions if you have anything. Send us an email. We'll stop the session. Thank you so much.